Hello, my lovely archaeogastronomers. Tom Dinas here. Thanks for tuning in. Firstly, I would like to extend a very, very grateful thank you to all my Patreon subscribers. All these years, with your support, you keep this podcast going. So why don't you join us as well in our vibrant community on Patreon and support this podcast from $3 a month, which is less than the price of a cup of coffee in London. And you get all these podcasts early and ad-free, plus extra material and recipes and writings and musings and videos too. Thanks once more. So, I hope you are all very, very hungry and very curious too. Welcome back to my culinary and historical exploration of our delicious past. Something fishy is happening here. Now, before this interview, I had a few conversations with many of my Greek friends and relatives, and they all seem to agree that they really like anchovies. Gavros, it's the fish in Greek, and it's something that they eat quite often, be in a seafood taverna or buying it from a deli shop, or having it eating it during Lent, or as a meze plate with other different foods like gigantes fasolia, which is giant baked beans, pickles, and other small dishes that we share with friends with an ouzo or a raki over a small fish taverna. And we talked about fried gavros or anchovies, marinated in vinegar and olive oil, salted. Seems like everybody eats it as a meze, which is very surprising compared to my UK counterparts, which, let's say it's an acquired taste. Not many people eat around here, or at least not many people know that they deliberately eat it as it is. Yes, in foods cooked in tomato sauces or with lamb and so on. But yes, this is a conversation we're going to have with my guest today, and this is no other than Christopher Beckman, author and archaeologist. My dear friend Archestratus, the Daedalus of tasty dishes, our ancient archaeogastronomer, our first Greek foodie from the ancient wider Mediterranean world, he talks about small fry, afue, which is, I think, where we get the word anchovy from, over the years, of course, through Latin and Italian and so on. Archestratus, the Daedalus of tasty dishes, says, small fry, value as shit, all small fry except the Athenian kind. I'm speaking of gonos, which the Ionians call foam. Get it when fresh and caught in the beautiful Bay of Phaleron in its sacred arms. It is also of good quality in the wave-grit roads, if it's local fish. And if perhaps you desire to taste it, you should buy at the same time sea nettles with long locks. Mix them together and bake them on a frying pan, grinding the fragrant flowers of the greens in oil. So why today, in the West, we have lost the appetite for anchovies? Let's go to my guest and explore all the tantalizing details here. On today's episode, I have the honor to have as a guest the author and archaeologist Christopher Beckman, which we talked about his book A Twist in the Tale, How the Humble Anchovy Flavoured Western Cuisine. It's an awesome book and a deep exploration of the history of fish eating, and especially small fry like anchovies, in the gastronomic West throughout the history from ancient Greece and Rome to today. And it's one of these very tantalizing voyages that we take through the ancient Mediterranean, the Middle East, the Far East, and the relationship that we have with the humble anchovy. Christopher Beckman, welcome to the Delicious Legacy podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
And what a great book.
Oh, that's very kind of you.
Yeah, I didn't expect what I was reading anyway. Yeah, I thought it's much better than I thought anyway. It would
Oh,
be
that's great. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
a lot more stuff in there about historical food anyway. But should we start? Let's jump straight into something what's the most surprising thing that you discovered while you were writing this book, or once you finished writing this book?
Well, that's an interesting question because before I started writing it, I did some preliminary research to see if this topic, anchovies in Western Europe and gastronomy over time, did it in fact even merit a book being written about it? So I did a little preliminary research. And one of the things that kind of started jumping out at me was I was looking at, the ancient Roman Empire. I was looking at France and Italy, Spain, Britain, and the US. And one of the things that popped out was each country approached anchovies in very different ways at different times. And that was the first time I started to get quite excited because I realized, oh, there's a real story here in how they each approached it. And for instance, in the Roman era, they were using, as you're well familiar, with garum. And traditionally, you look at scholars, and the narrative around Roman garum has always been very much based on mackerel and tuna and
Yes.
these large, higher priced fish. Well, and in fact, very early on, I thought, this doesn't quite resonate. I didn't think that was right. I thought, anchovies were going to play a much greater role.
Right.
And in fact, all the research in the last couple of years is showing that. So the Roman Empire was approaching kind of anchovies in one way, which was very different from the French, who used it in kind of aristocratic haute cuisine sauces. And it had this period of about 100 years. And then they fell out of vogue for various reasons we'll talk about. But that's very different from the British, which again, I'm sure this is something you're very well familiar with. And the British started out eating anchovies as a salty wet. You read a lot about Samuel Pepys eating them in taverns. Yeah. But what really kind of got me excited was when British sailors started bringing back imported ketchup. And then very clever cooks in Britain combined this foreign ketchup with their indigenous pickling traditions, and they created their own unique kind of condiments. So that's very different from the Spanish, who through most of their history actually did not eat anchovies. And I've spent some time and then lived different periods in Spain, and Spaniards are always shocked to hear that they didn't eat anchovies because they're currently the biggest consumers of anchovies in the world. But this is a very recent phenomenon.
Yeah, I'm shocked too. Like, I can't believe it. I mean, it doesn't sound like Spanish thing to do. But then again, like, if you jump a little bit on the book, obviously, what happens after World War II, the consumption of anchovies started. So, yeah, it's been like two generations. But even that, it seems we forget. Like, in 2 generations, we think it was forever, but no, it's not forever.
Yeah, and 2 generations is a drop in the bucket when you go back.
Yeah.
For hundreds of years, they really weren't, with the exception in the south of Spain, right? And then you have the Italians who were doing their own thing, and the Italians kind of consistently ate anchovies through all periods. But even the Italians had their detractors, because anchovies are very divisive. So anyway, when I looked at those countries and I suddenly realized each of them were approaching anchovies at different ways, at different times, and I thought, oh, you know what? There is a book there, and that's when I jumped in.
Yeah, you had a story to tell. Basically, there was not just one story, but lots of stories from all over the world, basically. Now, is Gilda the best pinchos, the best anchovy-based snack ever? Or
well, I'm a huge fan of the Hilda. And I love the fact that it's named after Rita Hayworth and the movie she starred in, Gilda, which is phenomenal. And there is something about a Gilda. I mean, it's 3 ingredients, right? So you have a green olive, a gundia pepper, green pepper, And then you have an anchovy, and and they put it all in a toothpick, and the anchovy kind of wraps around them. And there's something, each of them occupies their own real estate, but together they achieve this incredible flavor bomb
Mm.
that's quite extraordinary. So for me, I think Hilda is just a sensational pincho. And of course, taberna owners love them because, as tavern owners have been doing for hundreds of years, they want you to have a salty food. They want you to have a salty peanut, a salty anchovy to get you to drink more. So it's a
Exactly.
win-win.
Yeah, yeah. Win for everybody. I love it. I love it. Excellent. So let's move on to the Roman Empire. Let's move to the start of the journey on your book, basically. Let's talk about the anchovy in the Roman Empire. I was, as a person that I'm Greek, obviously, and I get a lot of I do a lot of research in ancient Greek food and ancient Roman food and all the sources that they exist from that era. And obviously, I know garum or gyros in Greek, and obviously it's a sauce made of fish, salted fish you leave mature in the sun for 3 to 6 months, and the liquid basically it's a very tasty umami bomb that the ancients used a lot for flavoring their foods, basically. But yeah, for large periods of time, like before, obviously, I delved in your book. The main thing that was mentioned a lot was garum made from mackerel mainly, like the most expensive garum, or as you said, from tuna as well. Which yeah, but you discover something different.
Well, that's right. And it's interesting because, again, there is this narrative that was very pervasive for many years in modern academia. And it was all centered around garum being made from mackerel or tuna. And I think that came from written classical sources. Like, Marshall, who talks about,
The
I'm going to
holy,
give you
the holy
the
garum.
finest
Yeah.
garum made from the blood of a still breathing mackerel. And my take was, wait, I thought Marshall was a satirist. He's usually making fun of things. He's often using food to make fun of things. And I've spent a lot of time in the East. And one of the things you find in the East is that they make fish sauce, which is remarkably probably similar to what ancient garum was. And they use almost exclusively smaller fish. And
Yes.
so I started kind of looking more closely at why this obsession with it being about mackerel. And again, I think it has to do with a few classical mentions of, again, it's like the equivalent of we read something that says, yes, I'm going to give you the finest gift of Dom Perignon champagne, and we're going to dine on that. And then, I mean, that's wonderful, but what do most people drink? Well, they're drinking either Prosecco, Cava, or Cremant because they can't afford that.
Yeah.
And so I'm not arguing that mackerel may in fact have been the finest garum. Absolutely fine. What were 90% of people consuming when they consumed garum?
Yeah.
They were consuming anchovy-based garum or pickerel or small fish-based garum.
Yeah, yeah. In general, small fish would be like any kind of small fish, basically salted.
Any kind.
Yeah, and that's obviously easier to catch and in bigger quantities.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's an oily fish. Anchovies have a very high oil content, which works very well in garum. And it's funny because the whole garum question in the West is very controversial because there's they label each of these amphora that the garum was held in. And a lot of these labels will refer to, the flower of mackerel, a garum of this kind of mackerel, the finest garum of that kind of mackerel. But then when they go in and analyze what actually the kinds of bones that were found in these garums, almost always It's anchovy or other small fish. And in fact, at Pompeii, at the house of Rufus, it's often called the house of the golden bracelet
Right.
because they uncovered a beautiful bracelet. And this character, Rufus in Pompeii, I mean, he was fabulously wealthy. I mean, he'd be the equivalent of an oligarch
Right.
in
Okay.
our day. He had this huge house, cobbled together of multiple mansions, all put into one. He had fabulous mosaics, beautiful paintings, the finest furniture. He had everything. And when we look at his garum, what do we find inside? Anchovy bones. So, it's really interesting, and I'm very thrilled to see that the whole debate about what was garum made from is changing more and more in the favor of small fish like anchovies.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, also technology evolves, and we have more scientific instruments nowadays to examine all the remains in more technical
Absolutely.
detail, and we find a lot more interesting information. And I think Pompeii is just like it has so much to tell us, so many stories more to tell us. So it's so exciting.
Yeah, I mean, Pompeii is absolutely mind-blowing. And again, in Pompeii, there's this place, what they call the garum shop. And they uncovered it first in the 60s. And when they excavated it, they found some old pots. And when they removed the lids, it still smelled.
no.
It was still so
No,
pungent.
really?
Yeah, it still smelled of fish sauce. 2000, almost 2,000 years later, which is
That's incredible.
But most of the bones in these various pots, regardless of what the label on the pot said, most of the bones were, they were predominantly anchovy, and then secondarily pickerel, with a few, mackerel thrown in here and there, and other kinds of sea bream and whatnot. But the vast majority were anchovy bones, which of course, I'm thrilled because I think anchovies have never quite gotten their respect that they're due. They're like the Rodney Dangerfield. They've never gotten the respect due in the West. In the East, there's no stigma, but in the West, yeah, they've had a hard road.
Yeah, totally. I mean,
so there's something about anchovies in the West that they're very, very divisive.
Yeah.
I don't know. Have you had this experience?
I have people, especially in UK, people saying they don't like anchovies or salted fish or, smoked fish and all that stuff. But growing up, I'm trying to remember when I was growing up, we would have it. So we would have the...
Did you grow up in Greece or in the UK?
I grew up in Greece. So we would have the fillets of anchovies, either in olive oil or in vinegar or something like that, cured. And it will be like a side dish with our main dish, which will be like pulses, like something like a bean stew or lentils or something like that. So we'll go with pulses, some olives, some pickles. It will be part of the table. So we would eat something salty and smoky like this with other stuff like this. And then...
Perfect way.
Moving on, like late teenage years, early 20s, when you drink raki or chipur or ouzo, you would have a salty fish meze with that. So it will be anchovies again, or a squeeze of lemon, a bit of olive oil, salted anchovies, and drink. And
great.
Drink your raki.
Great.
Yeah. And drink some more because you're thirsty.
Sure. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I kind of, obviously, I like them, the memories are good and I like them that way, but I don't think, it's been, I think from mid-20s onwards when I started cooking a lot more complex stuff, I thought of anchovies in food, actually, like putting it in, as you said, in a tomato sauce or, with lamb and all that stuff. It's like mind blown. You can put some fishy stuff with your big leg of lamb and transform it.
It's transformative. And what's interesting for me is that very consistently, the Italians have been doing that through history. And the Greeks may have been well. And funny enough, the very first question the publisher of the book asked me is like, well, why didn't you include Greece? And I was like, I just had to stop somewhere.
Exactly.
Because I had written so much. And it's worth noting, I already had to cut 50% of the book. So what you're reading is half the research. But you could have easily had a chapter of Greece in there.
Yeah.
Because the Greeks eat anchovies, like the Portuguese do.
Yeah, no, exactly. You're right.
And, I am a big fan and advocate. I mean, I love pinchos, but I really love them discreetly cooked into food and bringing a very subtle background hint of umami, which just improves everything. And a matter of fact, I mean, I'm in Australia right now, but I'm cooking a pumpkin soup this afternoon. And of course, 3 anchovy fillets went straight into that. And right away, my wife came in and was like, "Oh, it's better." And she looked at me and she goes, "Did you put anchovies in?" I was like, "Yeah." And she's like, "I knew it."
Is there anything that you don't put anchovies in?
I think they work in everything.
Exactly.
The Italians basically, I mean, there are recipes in the Italian cookery book, Apicius, right, from the ancient Roman era, that have basically fruit, melon with garum. So I've done an experiment and tried it, and it wasn't bad. I think fish sauce, a diluted fish sauce, is a little better than a concentrated anchovy fillet. But I'm a huge fan of both, whether it's a fish sauce, a garum, anchovy, they're all bringing umami in slightly different ways.
Well, if you think like prosciutto and melon, Italians do it these days.
Exactly.
So I guess a diluted garum with a bit of wine and a bit of honey drizzled on the melon is going to work really well. Yeah. You're listening to the Delicious Legacy podcast by me, Tom Dinas. There's more to come after the break, and it gets better.
Yeah, that's
it. Yeah, it's that umami thing that the anchovies provide, and like everywhere, like in the book, basically, in every era that you cover, in every country, it's basically an umami element without people obviously knowing what umami is.
Well, briefly, I'll just explain in case any of your listeners aren't quite familiar. But basically, in the West, for the last 2,000 years, we've had 4 accepted tastes: sweet, sour, bitter, salty, right? And then in the 1890s, a very bright visiting Japanese scholar was in Germany. And he said, I think I'm tasting something else. Anyway, he goes back to Japan, continues working, and sure enough, he discovers there's a 5th taste. But anyway, in the Western tradition, he kind of came up with this. We have these 5 tastes, and umami's this protein-rich, kind of mushroomy, roasted meat. And it's hard for people sometimes to appreciate what an exotic and sought-after flavor that was historically. Because nowadays, you can walk down to any grocery store and buy yourself a bag of crisps that is an absolute umami bomb. I mean, it is engineered to deliver a wallop of umami. You can go get yourself ramen noodle bowl, add hot water, and you've got an umami bomb. But most of history, most people in the West were not eating a lot of meat, unless you're an aristocrat.
Yes, you're
right.
You're
mostly eating, right? You're not eating, so you're not actually exposed to that taste of umami. So it was a highly sought after taste. And that's one of the things that anchovies really excel in, is that they're, to use an overworked phrase, they're little umami bombs.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think the garum delivered tons of it, and I think that's probably why it was used so much. But at some point it fell out of favor in the West.
No.
Although it's still been made in small places, right? Colatura di alici is made in Italy, and I had some a couple of years ago. I got a bottle before Brexit, when we could import stuff to UK from Europe much more easier and cheaper. And I think there's misconception of the garum, like that it stinks, that it smells of rotten fish, but that's not the case.
Yeah,
like that colatura di alici I had, it was more like had iron compounds on the smell, and more sea in general, and it was so beautiful, like so mellow. It was great.
Yeah, it's lovely. I mean, it is that there's no doubt colatura, Asian fish sauces, ancient garum, it is pungent. But I think a lot of the bad rap it got, why people react so strongly, is because the ancients thought it was being manufactured through putrefaction. So they thought it was actually putrefied fish. We now know it's enzymatic fermentation that creates the anchovy.
Yeah, I mean, with so much salt, you cannot have bad things
Yeah,
happening to the fish. Yeah.
exactly. It's only good stuff. But it can be quite pungent, but what that delivers. I mean, here's the interesting thing for me, Tom. That flavor you're talking about can be quite divisive. Now, you like colatura. I like colatura, but I guarantee you I could find 5 people within 100 feet of me that simply cannot
Right.
stand it. And the thing that I find super interesting is in the West, it is a highly divisive smell. And yet you go to the East, and there are 1 billion people eating fish sauce every day. It's a non
Yeah.
issue. Now, is it pungent? Absolutely. But it's not
Mm,
divisive. And so there's something in the West where a very kind of strict hierarchy of foods set up
mm,
that I think makes anchovies and garum and colatura so problematic. Because again, you can go to the East and you can have fish sauce, you can have dried anchovies. I mean, some people like them.
shrimp paste. Yeah. Yeah. You have.
Yeah, exactly. Shrimp paste, all kinds of things that are full of pungent flavor. And it's part of what makes food taste
Mm,
great. So it's a curious
yeah.
phenomena.
We have to. We
Yeah.
have to evolve a little bit in the West and yeah, get over our our fears or our yeah.
Well, my theory about that is, now I don't know if you agree with, I think this has to do, it goes back to the evolution of the Christian church
Right.
and fasting, also the 7 deadly sins, one of them being gluttony. And I also think, these factors set up a very hierarchical sense of food, which got particularly cemented into place with the
Mm,
Reformation. So, the Protestant North, suddenly, they weren't using any spices. It was all about food should not be a sensual
mm,
experience. It should be very simple. This is something that you derive nutrition from, and it's sustenance, as opposed to the South, the Catholic South, where it was much more of a decadent, pleasurable. I think it's connected to these things. And also an element of size matters a lot in the West. So the bigger the fish, the better the perception. The smaller the fish, the more inconsequential. And anchovy is one of the smallest
yeah.
there
Yeah. It's
is.
so small and yeah. I mean, you can easily dismiss it. And as you say in the book, the Spaniards for many years they used them as fertilizer. No.
Yeah, exactly. Funny enough, so while I was doing research, I was in the Basque
Yeah.
Country. And one day I'd been in a library doing some research. And afterwards, I was at a bar and I was having a glass of wine. I had some anchovies in front of me. And an older Basque gentleman, saw me eating them. And he was
Please.
really
Yeah.
pleased that I was having anchovies. And he's like, that's wonderful. We had struck up a conversation. And he said, I'm really happy to see you eating them because, anchovies are in our blood. We've been eating them for 500 years.
Half a millennia. Yes. Right.
And I didn't want to
No.
contradict him. I
No.
was a
You don't do that.
guest. I
Very
just,
nice of you.
had a sip of my wine. But in fact, 100 years ago, the Basque wouldn't touch an anchovy and they were using them as fertilizer. So it's very interesting,
That's madness.
these invented traditions and mythologies we have around
Oh yeah,
food.
so many, so many.
Yeah.
Should we move to the French medieval era? Because that's a very interesting part of the book as well.
Yes, absolutely. And is there any particular time or period you're interested in? Now, it's worth pointing out for your listeners that during the medieval period, we don't have that much information about anchovies and anchovy
Mm,
consumption, right? So we have a lot of information from the Roman era. And then starting in the early modern, and then I should say the late medieval period, we start to get more
yeah.
information. But the early periods, a bit of a, it's a very Spartan period because we know garum goes out of fashion for basically 3 different reasons. Garum fell out of fashion because it's an Italian archaeologist. This is his theory, but I think it's a very well articulated
Mm,
argument. He basically says salt became too expensive.
one reason, yeah.
Transportation systems broke down. And there were changing foodways as new groups were coming down from the
Hmm.
north, right? So you have the whole wheat versus oat and rye, beer versus wine.
Yeah.
Um, so those three things, garum fell out of fashion, and we suddenly don't hear that much about anchovies or fish sauce. And a matter of fact, one of the great stories that I love is in the 6th century CE, so about 500 or something, Anthemus wrote a book called On the Observance of Food. And in this book, he was a Byzantine Greek, educated in Constantinople. He was somehow implicated in some failed plot to assassinate Emperor Zeno, I believe it was. I mean, you probably know more of this than I do. But
Anyway, yeah.
anyway, to make a long story short, he gets exiled to Ravenna, the court of King Theodoric, which is just below, Ravenna was below Venice on the Adriatic Sea.
Beautiful city, and it was a capital. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. And Theodoric makes him sort of an ambassador to the king of the Franks. So he sets off, and it's a little unclear. Did he actually go to Metz in France? This part isn't sure, but he ends up writing a letter to the Frankish king on the benefits and dangers of different foods based on, kind of the paradigm of that time. But I also think he was kind of a bit of a wily fox in that, like a good diplomat, he was kind of sucking up to the Frankish king. Because one of the things he writes is, we ban the use of fish sauce from every culinary role. Now, what the hell? What is going?
Why? Yeah.
Why
How
would he write that?
bizarre.
He's a Byzantine Greek because
They used it.
they used it exactly. They were using fish sauce. Why would he? And then the more I kind of read and researched, I really think he was kind of sucking up and trying, good ambassadors mirror what their hosts are kind
Yeah.
of,
Yeah.
saying. So if his host is from the north and he knows he can't stand garum, what's the easiest way in the world? Well, hey, guess what? I ban it. You shouldn't be eating any of that because it doesn't make any sense.
I mean, that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you have these little kind of moments where garum's getting a really bad rap. And I'm actually just remembering another one, which I'm sure you also are familiar with, Liutprand of Cremona.
What a dude. Yeah. Yeah.
What a dude, huh? I mean, do you want to tell the story or should I? It's so funny, he sets off on this diplomatic mission. Again, it was a marriage proposal,
I
right?
think so. Yeah. For the Germanic.
For the Germanic king's daughter. They were trying to arrange a marriage with the Byzantine Emperor Nico the Second. I can't remember.
Nicephorus the Second. Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, Nicephorus the Second, and so this whole entourage, this diplomatic mission, arrives at the court. And the first thing that happens is they don't let any of his entourage in. They make them wait outside. Then they serve him really cheap wine. And, the food's not very good. It's in the Apician tradition. And Liutprand, the whole thing was a fiasco. And he writes back and he says that the entire court stank of fish sauce, garum. And, it just gets one bad. So there's not a lot of great stuff in the early medieval period about garum.
Yeah,
really.
And not much about anchovies. I think, and I think that's kind of the Western echoes now, basically, that fish sauce is bad or garum is bad or it was stank. Like we get our information from these sources.
Yes.
Yeah, but with France, like the medieval period, obviously you move on a little bit later in the late medieval period when we have some written sources, like some books, some cookbooks happening at the time, like the Viander, the Taillevent.
Yes.
I think. How do you pronounce it? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's Taillevent. I'm terrible at pronunciation, but that I thought was quite good.
So we have some mentions there, right? About anchovies.
Yes, exactly. And basically the Le Viander was a collection of recipes that had been in circulation in France for 100, maybe 150 years, had some additions made to it. And then in 1486, it basically was published for the first time, well,
Written
written
out, yeah.
out as a book, and numerous copies were made. And that book became a culinary
Mm.
blockbuster in France for the next 250 years. I mean, it really guided haute cuisine in France and became kind of their Bible. And it's Le Viander is essential to understanding aristocratic cuisine during this period. And interestingly enough, so there's a recipe with an anchovy in Le Viander. And basically the recipe is very simple. It says you take anchovies, cut into strips, probably they mean, fillet them, roast it, and then it says eaten with a mustard sauce or a wine
Mm.
sauce. And that's very telling because both the mustard and wine sauce, they let us know about the underlying logic of medieval cooking in relation to humoral theory, which is to say, this humoral theory guided how elites and aristocratic people were
Yeah,
eating,
they're
right?
supposed to eat and so to have good health and yeah, basically live longer and healthy
Exactly.
lives.
And so by balancing, because fish was considered cold and damp, so by balancing that with the warmth and the heat and the dryness of the mustard, and alcohol was considered warm and dry, you achieved a certain level of humoral balance, which led to a good, proper
Mm.
lifestyle. And, that humoral paradigm was simply their version of nowadays. We talk about, eating a whole food, plant-based diet with supplemented with a little fish, a little fowl, as minimize
Yeah.
red meat, because in our paradigm, this is how everything is going to lead to a long, healthy, long life. Now, it's supported by a little more data and
Absolutely.
science than
Yeah.
humoral theory, but it was nonetheless their paradigm at the time. And it's interesting because that paradigm, humoral theory, became, huge in guiding how elites ate and the various spices, and it drove this mania. It was a contributing factor to why spices were so in
Yeah, yeah,
demand.
yeah, absolutely. So yeah, we had all these different spices and yeah, like the black pepper and the melenggetta pepper and the long
Exactly.
pepper,
And
cinnamon.
cinnamon and ginger and, the whole array of them.
Yeah.
And you see them in another recipe book, which was published the first time, the earliest copy was in 1420, Du fait de cuisine, which I'm sure you're familiar with. And there again, there's an anchovy recipe, and it talks about cooking anchovies with parsley, onions, vinegar. And that still works to
Mm. Oh
this
yeah,
day.
yeah, absolutely.
Parsley, onions, vinegar. I mean, that's still going to be
Yeah.
great. And then it says add spice mix on top. And I can't remember the academic who basically very astutely unpacked what that was. And his argument was that was basically the spice mix was a combination of ginger, cinnamon, clove, and grains of paradise.
Is that what they call
Um,
powdered douche? Powdered. Yeah.
Yes, poudre. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, in French. Yeah, exactly. So they're using these spices to help achieve humoral
Mm.
balance, right? There's another one, Le Ménagier de Paris. But what's interesting is that starting in the 1500s, the food historian Rachel Loudon wrote an article called The Origin of the Modern Western Diet. And this was one of the key articles. There are probably 5 or 10 articles and books that really played a role in unlocking Western gastronomy. And this was one of the real ones. And I encourage your listeners, Rachel Loudon, Lauden, The Origin of Modern Western Diet. And in it, she talks about how if you went to a banquet in the 1550s as a modern person, everything would seem pretty
Mm.
foreign and alien. And yet, 100 years later, if you went to a banquet at, say, 1650, everything would be reassuringly familiar. Beef bouillon would be on it, oysters, anchovies, roast turkey with gravy. I mean, you'd recognize everything. And so what she does is she unpacks, what happened during this huge transformative period, because this is what unlocks the door for anchovies to become this huge rock star of French haute cuisine. And her argument is what changed was humoral theory fell out of fashion. And it fell out of fashion because they were excavating cadavers and dissecting them, and they couldn't reconcile Galen's humoral theory, which went back 1,300 years, with actually what they were seeing in human bodies. None of it lined up. Now, they came up with new theories, which were incorrect, but that doesn't matter for our story. What's important is that this opened the door to a new kind of cooking, because suddenly you didn't have to cook within the boundaries of humoral theory. You could just cook to please the palate of your master, the aristocratic house in which you were cooking. And that was a game changer.
Absolutely. Yeah, that was very important thing of the book. I think one of the
Yeah.
the way you tell the story there is beautiful. And we have recipes with anchovies and cooked with meat, and I think there's a chicken recipe that you mentioned in there somewhere.
Yep.
Like you have a few chefs, La Chapelle, Marin, Menon, and so on. They all have the anchovy basically is lifted now on that period.
Yes.
But something happens.
Yeah. Well, before we get to that, I'm just going to kind of add a key kind of a key cookbook in 1651 was François Pierre de la Varenne's La Cuisinière Françoise. And what he does for the first time is he prepares a fish, say a snapper or something, and he makes a very simple sauce with basically he uses a little butter, anchovy, chives, and a little of the water, the poaching broth that he cooked the fish in. And he suddenly makes this briny elixir sauce, butter-based. And that's what opened the door for anchovies really to enter French haute cuisine, because they become a flavor enhancer par excellence, okay? And so what we see after La Varenne, we see it in Massilot's cookbook of 1691, Le Cuisinière Royale et Bourgeois. Suddenly, 42 of his recipes feature anchovies in sauces or just cooked in with the meat or the fish. You can jump to then Marin's cookbook in 1742. Anchovies are just rising in popularity, and in haute cuisine, they're suddenly everywhere. And they kind of reach their peak with Menon, and he has 78 recipes with anchovies. So suddenly anchovies are flavoring everything because they're bringing umami to all these dishes.
Yeah, I have to say that a lot of these recipes, and at least the ones that you mentioned in the book, they sound great, actually. They sound like, I want to do this recipe.
You know what? I think we could cook all of those and we would all be thrilled, because they're actually, delicious. But as you kind of hinted, everything comes to a resounding crash with one of the great iconic figures of French gastronomy, and that is Carême. And, it's a little tough to pick an argument with Carême because he's this towering figure, It's like Carême was an international superstar. He's like if you took Lionel Messi and Michael Jordan and Paul Bocuse and, what's the British cook? He's got the TV shows and he's always in your face. Ramsay, right? You roll them all into one and you've got Carême. He was just this international superstar and widely he cooked for kings and queens, and he was called the king of cooks and the cook of kings, and, amazing. But one of the things he did is he reformed French gastronomy, and because he felt that there was too many spices still lingering from the medieval period. And he was correct. There were. So he stripped a lot of those spices out in order to get down to a simpler, and he did What he really focused on were his famous mother sauces. And these mother sauces were basically all meat reductions. Okay. So, but in order to, before we get to those meat reductions, as he's stripping the spices out, he strips anchovies out too. And that to me, it's a little bit of a crime against humanity because they never made their way really back into French cooking in a meaningful way till like the 1960s, 70s. That's my argument compared to the incredible role they occupied. But anyway, Carême strips them out, focuses everything on his meat reduction sauces, which, by the way, the British drove, the very common sense British cooks absolutely bonkers. This idea that you're going to take 10 pounds of perfectly good beef and reduce it down and a big knob of veal and then some chicken, it was a crime. That was a crime against humanity. And it kind of was, but he ended up making these incredible umami rich sauces, which blew the socks off diners. They had never again had anything like that. There was such a concentrated, powerful flavor bomb. It just took the world by storm. And in many respects, what Carême started, Escoffier, the other kind of towering, iconic figure,
more modern
in French gastronomy, he kind of finished. So by the time you get to Escoffier, anchovies have been stripped out of everything, and Escoffier basically will only really allow them in hors d'oeuvres. And, that's a bit of the sad tale of the French anchovy. Now, I should qualify that a bit with, we're talking about northern French haute cuisine. In the south, in Provence, all along the southern coast, they were happily eating anchovies as they had been for thousands of years. So there is a happy ending to this.
Well, I mean, there were also the anchois and the sausage that you make with parsley, anchovies, lemon, or vinegar. So that still exists and still flavors things to this day, which is nice. It's good. I mean, the French chapter is fascinating. I think I urge everybody to just take the book for that. But regardless of that, you also have the Spanish chapter, the Spanish story, which it's equally fascinating and long, as we mentioned a few tantalizing elements there. But we could go to America and explore the role of anchovies in America. What is the history there?
Well, America kind of had a funny relationship with anchovies because, to put it very simply, Americans just didn't get it. Now, I say that in light of, you have to remember, in 1880, 1850, 1900s, Americans were eating fish and meat on a level that Europeans couldn't even imagine. They were having huge pieces of fish every other night, immense quantities of, and we have letters from, one particular one I'm thinking of, it's of an Irish immigrant, and he's writing back to one of his cousins, and he says, "You're not going to believe this, but I eat meat every night." Because back in Ireland, they were getting it once every couple of weeks if they were lucky. So Americans fundamentally, the argument I kind of make is that they didn't really understand what was so special about this tiny little imported salted filet. Like, what is all the fuss about? Now, Britain had a long history because they were importing these salted anchovies from probably 1500s, 1600s, they're certainly eating them by then. So they have a long tradition of appreciating them and understanding them. And there are more salted fish connoisseurs. In America, they weren't really eating much salted fish. They wanted their fish fresh. They wanted it big. Bigger is better. And those Europeans are kind of crazy. Well, what's that all about?
Yeah, I guess it's as simple as that in a sense, right? Yeah.
I mean, it changed a little bit around, I would say, in the metropolitan cities, starting around, the elites in 1850s, 1870, 1880. Americans were financially doing phenomenally well. They were en route to becoming an economic powerhouse worldwide. But they had a lot of complexes. And one of them is that their wallet may be really wide, but they do feel slightly inferior to the old country,
Mm-mm.
to the British, to
French,
the
yeah.
French. So they took a lot of their culinary cues. So what we do find at this period is, and now again, I'm talking about absolute elites, are going into restaurants, 1880, 1890, and we can see they're ordering anchovy on toast.
Mm.
And then they're knocking that back with a shot of whiskey. So they're kind of taking some of their culinary cues because they could see, well, the French are
Yeah.
doing it. So
Let's.
let's kind of do that too. That there's, they, we want to do what they're doing
Mm-mm.
because they seem to know what they're
Yeah.
doing. But common Americans really weren't. Now, there were pockets of immigrants. So you had Greek immigrants, you had Italian immigrants, you had Portuguese, but they were very much not walled off, but they were entities unto their
Yeah.
own. They weren't exchanging foodways with the larger kind of Caucasian
Mm.
America. So, it took a long time before anchovies really took off in America in any kind of meaningful way.
Yeah. To this day, you think they're getting better now, or they're getting a better reputation, or?
Well, they are not until the last 20, 30 years, and really starting with kind of with Chez Panisse and various restaurants in the 80s and 90s in California and in New York who started this new kind of food, new cuisine. People had more disposable income, and we started getting better quality anchovies. And so now, of course, we can get phenomenal anchovies, and lots of people love them. But for the most part, Americans, it's still highly divisive. I mean, I always say, at least in Europe, eating them, and then they say they don't like them. And in the States, they won't even eat them. There's just no way.
It's like your friends, oh, you put anchovy in the food. I'll have a beer, thanks. Another thing I want to ask you is, so anchovies, the salted anchovies and the anchovies preserved in olive oil, is that a fermented product?
Yes, absolutely. And it's actually really good that you bring this up because I was just actually having a conversation with someone the other day explaining why you should refrigerate your anchovies.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, when you buy, whether it's salted anchovy or if you buy it in a tin packed in oil, they're both fermented. And basically, when you're buying in a tin, they're just taking salted anchovies out of a barrel. They're scraping all the salt off. They're separating the fillet from the bone. And then they're taking the skin off. And then they're delicately by hand putting it in a tin.
So this is all handmade, hand process?
It's all handmade. They're put in tins, and then they top it up with some kind of oil, can be vegetable oil, olive oil, and then they seal it. Now that's sent out to the market. Now, the one thing that hasn't been done to that product is it hasn't been pasteurized. So anchovies are continuing to ferment, which is why by storing your anchovies in the refrigerator, you're slowing down that fermentation process so they last a lot longer. Now, by contrast, when you buy a tin of sardines or mackerel
They're
or
cooked.
pulpo, exactly. They're put in the tin, they're sealed, and then they're put in giant pressure cookers, brought up to, I think it's 190 Celsius for 10, 12 minutes, whatever, kills absolutely everything in it. And now it can sit on the shelf for 2 years and it's absolutely fine. So ideally, you want to refrigerate, particularly if it's a good anchovy from, say, Italy or Spain. If it's a cheaper quality one, it's not as important, but yeah, it's a good idea because they're still fermenting.
Yeah, that's another thing. Like, you don't think about anchovies as a fermented food, and that again connects other things as well. Like, we love fermented food as humanity.
We do. And it's funny. And I think fermentation right now, I mean, we can get kefirs, we can get yogurts. I mean, it's having a moment fermented, right? Kimchi, everything is fermented. You go into and it's great. I'm a big supporter because anchovies are right in there with it. And what we're finding is all these fermented foods have the right bacteria for our guts because we've evolved kind of symbiotically with them over time. So, our bodies are ready and waiting for these things.
So we should eat more anchovies. That's what you say. for our good, for our
Yes.
health, not
Yes.
because.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very like again, that's something that kind of blew my mind a little bit. I mean, you don't think about these things, like anchovies being a
No.
fermented food. Yeah, but
It doesn't, yeah, it doesn't. It took me, I never realized it till I started researching the book that it was and it's an active fermented product. It's fermenting when you get it, which is great, like a kefir, like a yogurt, like any fermented product. Yeah.
fantastic. Yeah. What's your favorite recipe with?
I have found over the last couple of years, I go through phases. So early on, when I was much younger, I was doing a lot with pasta and anchovies. So I'm a little older now. I really like anchovies cooked with fish and fowl. That's really, and I made a chicken a while back with fish sauce, kind of dousing the whole thing in fish sauce. Absolutely sublime. It was sublime. You can also take anchovies. I take a couple fillets of anchovies. I put them through a garlic press.
Okay.
Mash them up, and then I rub that into a chicken, rub it under the skin, rub it inside the cavity. It just takes chicken to another level. But then I also, love anchovies with any kind of cruciferous vegetable. So anchovies and kale, it's a winner. Anchovies and bok choy. Just stir fry it. Little olive oil, garlic, anchovy, boom, you're done. Cabbage and anchovy, any cruciferous, Swiss chard and anchovy. I mean, I have so many, Lamb is, as I've gotten older, lamb is really probably, if I'm going to eat a quadruped, if I'm going to have red meat, lamb is the one for me now. And lamb and anchovies are just, oh my God, there are a million great recipes out there. Yeah, just divine.
Great. And you having anchovies for dinner tonight with your soup, right?
Yeah, exactly. I'm having it with pumpkin soup tonight. It's basically roasted pumpkin. I roasted a clove of garlic and a giant onion, which I had to peel off the outer layer. It got so black, and ground it all up, and basically added a few herbs. What was not a lot's available in Western Australia, and some anchovy. And actually, when I get done here, I'll go in the kitchen, give it a taste, see what's missing, and we'll go from there.
Fantastic. Well, Christopher, I think we can wrap up our conversation somewhere here. It's been a pleasure having you on the podcast.
Well, thank you. It has been my pleasure. It's a delight speaking with you, someone who's very knowledgeable and informed about these topics. That's a real pleasure.
Thank you. And let's say your book is called A Twist in the Tale.
Yes, A Twist in the Tale, How the Humble Anchovy Flavored Western Cuisine.
And it's out now, of course. People can get it wherever they get their books, right?
That's right.
I'll put a link on the show notes so people can find the book, because it's definitely a fascinating book to have. Thank you so much. And I hope I talk to you soon. If you have any new books, any new endeavors that we can explore in the future.
I will keep you posted. Listen, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really enjoyed my time talking with you, Tom. So you take care, okay?
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Right. And that's it for today's episode. So, where do you stand on anchovies? Is it a flavor bomb, an umami treasure for you? Or an abomination, something to be avoided at all costs? I hope we kind of changed your opinion of the latter. And please let me know your thoughts about anchovies, fish sauce, and all other seafood related things. A huge thanks to my guest Christopher Beckman, archaeologist and author of the A Twist in the Tale, How the Humble Anchovy Flavored Western Cuisine. His book is out now, and you can get it from every good bookshop. Even Nigella Lawson got obsessed by it. Right, if you want to ask any questions or want to get in touch with suggestions or ideas, please email me at the Delicious Legacy Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. Or come over on Blue Sky, the social platform which is the new and better and more civilized Twitter, and join me there. or on Instagram, where you'll find me as The Delicious Legacy. I'm waiting eagerly for your comments, my clever, hungry people. Don't forget to rate and review the podcast wherever you get your podcasts from. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Acast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and so on. Your rating, recommendations, and reviews help the podcast be more visible on other people's feeds, and of course, there are many more ancient adventures to explore together. I would love to, into the not-so-distant future, to arrange a culinary historical adventure of Greece, through ancient cities, tall and greenest, wildest mountains of my homeland. I'm interested to see if any of you would like to take part in such adventure. Vineyards, tavernas, museums, the blue Aegean Sea, forested mountains with nymphs and gods. Get in touch, let me know. And don't forget, my good self, Dr. Neil Battery, Dr. Alessandra Pino, and the amazing Sam Bilton, we are organizing the first ever food history festival called Serve It Forth, which is happening on the 18th of October 2025, so in about 2 months from today. Please get in touch on Instagram, Blue Sky, or through Eventbrite and get your tickets, because there is a 25% discount for early birds. We have some exciting guests, like Brigitte Webster and Tom Parker Bowles, being part of our first ever food history festival. Looking forward to seeing you all there. That's all for this week's episode. Thank you and goodbye.